was a really interesting guest. This is Breaking Free the Personality Prison, Eric G's mission to help you discover your true self. The show exists to transform your life and business through conversations that inspire, equip, and uplift. I connect busy people to powerful voices, authors, leaders, and world changers you need to know. What if everything you've been told about who you should be is wrong? Eric G believes we're living in a world of personality conformity, where society forces us into predetermined boxes and labels our authentic differences as weaknesses. In his book, The Power of Personality, Eric reveals how understanding the 16 distinct personality types isn't just about personal growth, it's about human survival. Using animal archetypes and decades of coaching experience, he shows us how to break free from the shoe mentality and embrace the diversity that makes humanity strong. Eric is a life coach and writing coach with over 20 years of experience. He is the founder of Utopia Creative and creator of the Utopia Project Personality magazine. His work has been featured on Apple TV's Mythic Quest, and he brings both intellectual rigor and infectious humor to understanding human personality. You'll discover why traditional personality tests get it wrong, and how to become your personality detective, and why embracing our differences is the key to authentic relationships and societal healing. Connect with Eric at projectutopia.com and prepare to break free from whatever shoe society has tried to make you wear. With that, I want to welcome Eric to the program. How are you doing today, Eric?
How's it going? I'm doing great, Mick. How about yourself?
Fantastic. Thanks for asking. I'm really excited to talk to you because it sounds like such an interesting thing. How did you come across the personality and all of that stuff in the first place?
As a kid, I always felt a little weird and not like I think I fit in on the outside, but on the inside, I was always like, oh, like the kids like to go to school dances and they like all these things, or at least you're told that you should like those things. And I didn't particularly feel that same way. And so I kind of fell into it. I was like, oh, like I read this book that, is by David Kersey called Please Understand Me Too. It seemed like I wanted to understand myself.
Sure.
And it kind of went through different personality types that he had constructed. And from there, I started researching it more and more at a personal level. I ended up starting up my education company where we really used it with maybe 1,000 students a year. But I really got to see it in action as a kid because I noticed, now my father knew nothing about personality types, nothing about different personalities. And yet I could see that he treated my siblings and I differently. So that was an interesting thing where you normally see parents saying, oh, we're treating you all the same. We're treating you fairly.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, my dad gives my sister way more freedom than he gives me. For me, he would always put a little chip on my shoulder by making me feel wronged in some form or fashion. And then my little brother, he called Mr. Wonderful. So I think those are three very different things, but I realized that it worked well for all three of us. So
fascinating, because I'll tell you, this is why I got a personal interest in. I read a book many years ago when I was young too, The Authoritarian Personality. And I said, that's really interesting because I wanted to know, like, it was something about myself. Am I an authoritarian? Am I attracted to that? So that's why I found what you're saying so fascinating.
Yeah, the first question on that quiz is, do you have a poster of Lenin on your wall? And then I've taken that quiz too.
And if you do, then you might be red. I don't know. That's sure. But when you did this, and then maybe it ties into your work as well too, because you're very active in all these things having to do with Utopia. And what is that all about? And how does that tie in with the book?
Oh, well, I'd run a life coaching. It actually started as a writing coaching. I was a writing coach before because my academic background is in screenwriting, strangely enough. And as I was teaching it more and more, I was like, wow, like being a writing coach is really more about being a life coach, because at the end of the day, really no one cares about grammar. I mean, they do, but that's what editors for. Structure is important, but when it all comes down to it, people are purchasing and buying your voice and listening to your voice. And it's really hard to know your voice if you don't really know yourself, right? And it comes into play. I think when we learn how to write, people tell you, this is the way you should write. This is the way how you should communicate. And it's like, well, we all have our own way of communicating. And really, I always tell my students, the only two rules are being interesting and being honest. If you're those things, then your writing is going to take off. And that's where I bring the personality side into it. I try to help them find what's important to them. And in a sense, they find their personality type that way. And then they can find the best way that personality type expresses itself.
And that's really key, because I think that is one of the difficult things for most people to understand. You have an academic background, and recovering academic. And would say to my students something like, "You were really bored when you were writing this." Like, "How did you know that?" Like, "Well, the tone is bored, right?" So your personality is coming across and your voice is coming across whether you recognize it or not.
Yeah, I think when I always tell some of my students are generally like junior high to then till I don't say forever, but I do have older students, older clients. Um, and I always tell them, you know what your teachers are doing? What do you think your teachers are doing when you're reading your papers? And they're like correcting them. I'm like, yeah, they're watching Netflix. They got Netflix on and they're watching it while they're kind of reading your papers because they got like 30 of these things. And I'm like, if you can get them to pause their Netflix because your thing is so interesting
Mhm.
and your voice is so compelling that they want to read it and fully digest it, that's when you know you got them.
Yeah, it's an excellent point because, yeah, you're right. When I was grading papers, which I hated, by the way, it's like I was doing something else. So when my daughter was writing, I would always say, whatever is the most dramatic and the most unusual, the strangest thing you can write about, even if you don't agree with it, that will force you to write in a better and more forceful manner. And that's why I always said, try that kind of approach.
Oh yeah, no one wants to read a script about the village of the nice happy people, right? There's got to have some kind of tension and conflict, and I think bringing our voice to the picture really helps build up that drama.
And since you're a writing coach, people are very interested. Like, how do you write yourself? Do you have a writing process? Do you have writer's block? When do you write? I mean, people are very interested in how writers actually write themselves.
I tend to write in bunches. I'm not great in the morning for anything really, so I'm not a morning writer. And I know King tells you to write nonstop. I tend to work best in the afternoon and night, and I'll write in bursts. So I'll just I need like a certain amount of time. I'm not someone who's like I can spend 1 hour every day. I kind of have to get warmed up and get into it. But I know everyone's process is different. That's just the way it works for me. I'm like, okay, I'm going to write for these 3 or 4 hours because as you mentioned, Utopia, I own a creative space here in Los Angeles where that's what people come in to do. They just come in to like focus. It's not like a library, it's not that quiet,
Yeah.
but there's ideally a great amount of creative energy that's made there. And so then people can kind of feed off of that, kind of like going to the gym.
And then, since you're a creative person, maybe this is an easy question for you. It's a softball question because a lot of people struggle with writing, but creative people tend not to because they are so creative. Does that work for you, or what's your process like?
Yeah, I hate to say it's easy because it's never easy, right? I've been to things where writers are like, oh, I just sit in the bed and every hour I feel inspiration and then I write a novel. I'm like, well, no, it takes some more work than that. I think I do feel for me a lot of the work is done when you're not even writing, right? Strangely enough, when I'm in the car and zoning out, um, that's when a lot of the thoughts pop in my head. And the hardest part is I got to remember this. I got to remember it
Mm,
because when I sit down in that 3 or 4 hours, that's when I'm going to throw all that stuff in there.
yeah.
So I do feel like with creative people, I think the creation happens 24/7.
So it's like that flash of insight that's maybe kind of Zen type of thing, right? It just comes to you at some point.
Yeah, and then once you pick that up, then you just roll with it. Then it's like surprising how much writing you can get done. But then once again, when you're stuck, that 1 hour might take an hour or 2 hours to write 2 sentences. But if you get on that roll, you can write. It flips, right?
And I've heard some writers and songwriters have said this too. That's sort of like having their antenna out. And what you had said about capturing those ideas is really key because the story is Paul McCartney came like in the middle of the night for one of his most famous songs. I forget which one, but he woke up in the middle of the night and then said, "Oh, I got to start writing this song down." So it can be a flash of insight virtually at any time.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things you can't control, but I guess that's why they call it inspiration, right? It comes from inside, and you can't control your inside sometimes.
Yeah. And like when you think about this, I mean, we'd like to interest and dig a little bit into the book itself. So there's personality types and you're a personality detective. Could you tell us about the content of the book itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think what sets my book apart from other personality type books, and of course, I've read a lot of them. And I say that there's 16 different personality types, so I think that number is going to be familiar to people who are into Myers Briggs. But the way I go about diagnosing that is different. I split people up into four. I call them packs because my 16 personality types, I use animal symbols.
Yeah.
And so within the four packs, each one has a different core value, and I think that core value is a lot bigger than we often think. I think when we think of differences in different personalities, we assume very superficial things. And I'm always telling it is more than just being structured and versus being flexible. Like it's a lot more than that. It's like these packs value very, very different things, whether one is valuing safety and security, the other one is valuing excitement, one valuing self-knowledge, one valuing information. Those are very different things. And I think that's how I kind of go separate people into 4 different packs. And then within those 4 packs, there are 4 animal personality packs. 4 times 4 obviously makes 16.
Well, the last time I checked it, so
Yeah.
I didn't.
I wasn't a math major, so I don't know.
Yeah, me neither. So it's like my simple math. Keep it simple, stupid. As they say, it's true. So how did you come up with this particular notion? I mean, was this something, that flash of insight, or with a lot of books that are out there, how and why did you say I'm going to differentiate myself?
I think it really came from that conflict that I felt in the beginning where I was like, wow, like it does seem like everyone values this thing. Now, I came to find out that it wasn't. It was just that because what I realized was about half the population do fit into one of those personality packs because they're not equal. It's not like 25, 25, 25, 25. It's like 50% in just one. And it's the one that values safety and security. So when we think about all the values that get often thrown down to us in school, like, what do they say? Always do your homework. Do it by this time, have an organizer. If you get good grades, you're gonna have this linear path to success because I think people like that notion of like certainty, right? But I realized it's only about half the population that values that. And I started to see that when I was own my own education company, that I could see like, about half the students were kind of like cautious and rule following. And I think we need to know that there are other types of personalities because I think we can grow from the push and pull from each one. And I think it's dangerous when about half the population is one type because then everyone feels like they should be that type when it's not particularly healthy.
And that definitely, I like to unpack that idea a little bit because I do see that what you're saying is more of a social impact as well, too, because if 50% of the people are in one category and the other people don't, that's why I think you can make the point of, well, where do we fit? Because we don't seem to fit into everybody else's view or shoe, as he put it, like everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, it goes through anything as far as even academics. I was actually having a discussion with someone where they're like, wow, really, it's, if you told people, you don't always have to go to school and you don't have to go to school like right away, right? Like after you graduate high school, you don't have to go to college right away. Maybe you can work, maybe you can do other things. But I think sometimes if you have 2 gatherer parents, of course, they want their kid in a safe environment, an environment that they think is certain, that they're certain to have a job after. Anyone who's graduated from colleges knows that that's not a certainty to have a job waiting for you. And I do think like it's healthy to get the push and pull from other people when their value system is different. Like, so the other pack that values excitement, they make about 1/3 of the population. So you get one group that makes up about half, one group that makes about 1/3. And I think that's the juxtaposition that we're used to, which is the kind of responsible, but maybe rigid person with the flexible, but maybe irresponsible person coming up against each other. But even then, like that's only about 80 to 85% of the population. And then there's that 15% that's different too.
And then what do we do with those? Are those the people that are the firebrands? They're the rebels, or they're the creative? Who are the rest of the population then?
Yeah, so there's the other 2 that value self-knowledge and one values information. The one that values information, I used to say a different word. I used to say, oh, they prioritize knowledge. And then everyone's like, oh, I'm that one. I want knowledge. I'm like, yeah, but do you prioritize it over your safety and security? And now the question I always give people, and I put it in the book as well, because the book is all about, okay, this, when it comes down to it, this is really the decision and prioritization method that you have to use. I always ask, well, would you take an experimental drug, not necessarily knowing the symptoms that it might cause, and take it yourself to see if it works? And I'm not saying that certain types that like information will always say yes to that, but they might think about it. They might ask me questions like, well, what is this drug going to cure? Is it going to cure cancer? Is it going to be able to like do something really amazing? Then maybe I will take that because I want to see if it works. Versus the safety and security people will be like, hell no, I am never going to do that. That is not on my list of things to do. So I think it's that prioritization that's super important to understand.
And since you have a background in education, I think a question that a lot of people are wondering about is the educational system really serving individuals and society properly, in that a lot of people have said there is this kind of shoe mentality, like, okay, get passive and just look for security. And it's almost as if we're back 100 years ago. Everyone is expected to work in a factory and do what they're told. So is education better or worse as a result?
I mean, I definitely think it's a lot worse from my experience. Here's the interesting thing. My experience, most education professors in higher ed and academia tend to understand that. And they tend to be what I call shamans, which focus on self-knowledge. So of course, like theoretically, they're really focused on like, let's treat every kid differently, help them grow and create their own individual path. And that's what they're teaching the teachers of the future. And yet, once you actually get into the nuts and bolts, the school principals and a lot of administrators more like, no, this is, we follow this thing because this is what's been told to us by the state. And it's not like that they totally agree with it or they don't totally disagree with it. They're just more like, well, they don't want chaos, so we're going to follow what we've been told, and thus you as a teacher should follow what we've been telling you. And so then I think that pervades into the students, and I saw it. Obviously, we worked 1,000 students a year, and even for those that do prioritize safety and security, I do think there's a, even though that's your core value, there is a certain like value to spreading your wings. Now, you don't have to like, I always call them, they live in a bubble. And that sounds like a pejorative, but it's not. Bubbles are really safe and secure.
Yeah.
But you want to spread that bubble slowly, right? Because the
Mhm.
moment you agitate it too much, it's going to pop. And you don't want it to pop. But that is kind of like the growth cycle for people with that personality type, like that value, safety, and security. Treat it like a bubble, spread their bubble out, because then you're going to find that they're going to have a huge bubble and it's going to have a lot of things in there and it's going to be very safe.
Yeah, the first thing, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of course, safety is first, but you also in education, you realize that when you're working with younger people in particular, and can work for adults too, if you slowly expand and allow that person to grow in a responsible manner, then it's much better for them because they realize what their capabilities actually are.
Oh yeah, and then of course you have the other personality types who are not even waiting. They're just like, yeah, let's just do it. Come on, let's. Everyone knows that third of the population that likes excitement because they're in the kindergarten class and they're like running around and like grabbing things and throwing things up in the air. I'm like, oh, okay, like that's how they learn. And then you'll have. I had a student that I worked with, and she was about, I think she was 11 when she told me this, where she's like, I don't want to grow up. And I was like, you know what? I totally understand what you mean by that. I empathize with it. And I just told her, you know what? You will grow up, but you don't have to grow up in the way that you think you do. Because she's one of those minority types that makes up about maybe 8% of the population. And, she's just seeing, and I'm sure she's hearing a lot of the adults in her life tell her things like, oh, eventually you're going to have to be realistic. You can't use your imagination. You can't be thinking about these things. You got to like focus on getting a job, or going to school to get good grades, to get a job. And I told her, you can grow in your own way. You don't have to grow up like that.
Do you find that there are differences that, like, just to address the gender question, difference between boys and girls, and even the way that boys and girls are treated in education?
For sure, the treatment. I think the easiest thing, I was reading a book, and I think everyone knows, like when a boy's little and they cut their knee or scrape their knee and they start crying, oftentimes people say, "Hey, like, don't worry, like, walk it off. You toughen up, right?" And then if a girl does that, I think oftentimes people's reaction were like, "Oh, are you okay?" Put a band-aid on it and do that kind of thing. What I found is that socially speaking, it works. Like, so we're socially programmed to be a certain way, but I don't necessarily know if that always fits personality type. Now, I call them gatherers. That's the pack that like safety and security. They are more likely to follow the social norms, the cultural norms, because that's what they've been told, and they say that's how I should act. So if you're a gatherer, more than likely you will kind of maybe fit into gender norms a lot faster and a lot more common than other types might. But there's a whole other half of the population where gender really doesn't matter.
And when you said about in your own upbringing that there were differences within the family, is this impacted by families of origin and also birth order and things of that nature? What impact does that have on personality?
That's a great question. And that's kind of how I found out, like, wow, some of the birth order stuff and this culture stuff doesn't really fit. And I'll address the cultural part first, because you go, like, I watch a lot of cooking shows, right? And in every cooking show, they're going to different countries, and each country is like, oh, we come from a culture that likes to eat. But you hear it every show. So I'm like, oh, is it just this culture, or is it this person that is like sharing and cooking for people, right? And I think we get that. Like, they say, oh, like for example, if you take a beaver type, and the beavers are not into hugging and any like big expression of emotion, and you put them in, like, let's say Latin America, where there is a lot of physical contact in the culture, right? Like families. I have a friend who's a shark, and he's half Cuban, and he's like, God, I wish my family stopped hugging me so much, right? And on the flip side, if you take someone who's vivacious and loves to express themselves and loves to hug and big old bear hugs, take that personality type and they grow up in traditional, like an East Asian household, they're going to feel weird too, right? So I feel like culture impacts the way we're treated and the way that our personality is really what holds true. And so I think I found that contrast quite a bit as I've gone on in my life.
And then as far as the birth order, how does that fit in as well?
Yeah, I think we all, what I mentioned in the book is, when half the population fits into that gatherer category of liking safety and security and certainty, then if you get your sibling, your oldest sibling, as one of those types, they will definitely parentify. They will be in charge. They will feel like they're the responsible one. But, that only works half the time. But I can see why people are like, oh, yeah, this works all the time, because they see it more than half of the time with this personality. But as someone who had an older sibling who's not that personality, I could definitely see, oh, like my sister was all about, no, screw you guys. I'm just going to do my own thing and you guys can do what you want to do. And she just wanted her freedom and wanted to like go places. Whereas our youngest sibling, he has that personality type. So it's funny, like, so it defies birth order because he's the one who's texting us and saying, hey, what should we get mom for her birthday? And then my sister and I don't respond. And then he's like, oh, okay, I'm going to get her this. What do you guys think? We don't respond. And then he's like, okay, I got her this. And then we respond. We're like, okay, we'll Venmo you. And I think people can find that out just by experience, that their siblings don't always fit the birth order type.
Hmm. And when you said about the animals too, I was curious what animals you use, because you made some references there on what kinds of animals. So what animals could you use animal archetypes for personalities?
Well, so for the gatherers, the ones that feel they seek out safety and security. We have the stags, the beavers, the elephants, and the bears. And each one has its archetypal symbolism. I don't want to go into each one specifically, but you can see how a beaver builds dams for the community because they like safety and security. Gatherers are great too. It seems like I might be picking on them quite a bit here, but we need them to maintain the laws. We need them to maintain order, to create structure, and they are very communal. So as you can tell, those are all very communal animals in their own way, versus the hunters, and that's the group that values excitement. And from the hunters, we have foxes, sharks, peacocks, and butterflies. And I think the fox is probably the best symbol for that, because I think we all know what a fox is like. I think when you said, wow, you're like a fox, I think people are like, oh, okay. Most people take that as a compliment because like, oh, you're saying I'm cool and I'm like sly. And then for the shamans, we have the, I'm sorry, remember my own types. We have the humpback whales, the dolphins, the pandas, and the baboons. A little bit harder to figure out how those match into the self-knowledge people, but you'd have to read the book to figure that out, because once it gets to the abstract part, it gets a little wonky. And then we have the Smiths value information. And we have the owls, we have the chimpanzees, we have the killer whales, and we have the spiders. So I know I've zoomed through those animals really quickly, but hopefully people can kind of get a gist of that.
Well, we got to get the book. I mean, obviously, but it's like 4 and 4. So I mean, at least we get the outline so that people can grasp it, and then you can dig down into getting the details of it as well. And then what's in the future here? Like, where do you go from here? Is it part of what you're doing in your project? You have more books in mind? Where do we go?
Yeah, I think the next one would be, so my book is focused on teaching people to be the test, right? It tells them the methodology. And by the way, I hope it's a fun, book. Like I use a lot of pop culture references, because I feel like that's like the best way to understand things is, if you're not going to use people and relate it to people in your life, at least know pop culture characters, because they'll be like, oh, okay, like I can see that this character acts a lot like this character, or that when these two characters have these separate personalities, they're going to like butt heads, right? And so the book teaches you to be that test. And I think the next book will be a bit more prescriptive, because it'll be like, well, now that you know what personality type you are, then, how will you relate to these other types in like maybe romantic situations? Because that's generally the question people ask me. It's like, okay, now that I know I'm this, who should I hook up with? And I'm like, well, it's a little bit more complex than that. And so I realized, oh, that should probably be the next book.
And then in your process of writing too, another aspect of writing obviously is, since you're a writing coach yourself, I mean, do you use a writing coach? You get feedback from other people about your own work to bring a perspective to you?
Yeah, I always felt a feedback group as extremely helpful. So having a group of writers, and by group I mean, I was part of one, and it was about maybe 5 people. One of which actually wrote on the show Mythic Quest, which is how why she put some of my ideas in her episode, which was very nice of her. And she changed the animals to make it funnier. But I do think it's really helpful to have a group of people that you trust, not just personally, because
Mhm.
obviously the personal thing is important because you need to be able to say personal things about their artwork, right? That where sometimes you can't be afraid to
Mhm.
like critique someone, but also like on the craft side, they should be very skilled in like bringing up the things that you don't particularly see. So I would definitely recommend for everyone to be part of a feedback group if they want to produce stuff, and it also gets you to produce it faster because if you're bringing something, if, let's say your feedback group meets once a week, you're feeling pressure to like kind of perform and produce at least something that you can submit once a week.
Yeah, there's accountability factor, right?
Right.
Because you're always seeking safety, then you got to be putting yourself out there a little bit, in which a lot of people do. So
Mhm.
I'm curious as we kind of wind things down. I mean, the publishing process too, there's so many options today. So with traditional hybrid self-publishing, what's that process like for you? How did you find a publisher? What were your thoughts along publishing?
And I think every single person has their own preference. I had a friend who was in the middle of the agent query process. And she's actually another member of my feedback group, actually. And she's about maybe, let's say, 9 months ahead of me. So to be honest, I kind of just followed what she did, what she told me. She told me, oh, like, you could either go the self-publishing route, which her first book, she self-published. And then her second book, she was going to go through the traditional publishing route. And I just asked her, and she just said, obviously, the pros and cons. And I think the pros and cons are pretty obvious. If you do the self publishing route, you do have to do a lot of the stuff yourself, hence self, which is the promotion, like getting the design, book cover design. The benefit, of course, is that you take a bigger cut and you have a lot more control over what you're producing. The traditional publishing route, they kind of take care of everything for you. But I will say that it is a pain to get the agent, and that's kind of what I did, but I just kind of followed exactly what she did, which is basically find make you there are websites out there where you can find agents, a list of agents, figure out the ones that are best for you that you think fit what you're saying or producing in your voice, and then make a list of 100 of them. Compile 100 agents that you think fit you, and then that's already a hard process. And then just start querying them 30 at a time. Just follow the query process. That's what I did. And don't be afraid if they don't even they're not even going to communicate with you. They're just going to say no. They won't. You're not going to get an email back. But just keep plugging away, and eventually you will get someone to reply.
Well, fascinating discussion. I appreciate your time. So I hope now you can tell us, like, where do we get the book? How do people get a hold of you? Contact information? Like, what would you think as a follow up you should do?
Well, the first thing you really can do is you go on my website, and if you want to, you can take the test. And now I
Mm.
will put the disclaimer that the test is a cookie cutter online test, but you could go, and it's a different website. It's utopiaproject.com, YOU, as in YouTube, utopiaproject.com, and you can take the test on that site.
Nice.
And if you're really interested and you want to learn more, because it's going to give you a brief description, buy the book, of course. I'm always going to recommend buy the book. You can find that on Amazon, and then also just go to your local bookstore and order it from there as well.
Right. A fascinating discussion. You got a really interesting topic and a fascinating book. So I really appreciate your time and your insights too, because they're really helpful for people. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you much for having me, Mick.
You bet. Well, I don't know if you learned anything, but I'll tell you, I certainly did. Now I'm very curious. Am I a shark? Am I a beaver? What am I? So, in any case, what I'd like to do is to also make sure that you get in touch with me, reach out. If you want to know more, I can help me create a valued book in 90 days. So, I help business leaders, CEOs, and entrepreneurs break through their obscurity through written presentation. You can build credibility and authority. And of course, I also want to thank the promoters of the program and all their support in the publishing of both Burning America and also On Track Ian Hunter. Reach out to me. You can catch me on LinkedIn. Thank you very much for joining us. I know you have other choices and I appreciate your time. And of course, Eric takes some time out to come and speak with us today. Until next time, this is the Doctor of Digital signing off. Deus Volt.